Okay, so here's the second video in the social media analytics module, and this is all about audience analytics, engagement. It's a bit more practical than the first video you just watched. This is how I actually go about, in a much scaled down version of this, teach these practices to students as part of our social media class. And so let's first start with a bit of terminology that you're going to see over and over again when you deal with social media analytics, and that's impressions and reach. Really important to understand the difference between these two and why the platforms use one over the other. So impressions is the total number of times content was placed in a feed. So remember, this is especially when we're dealing with algorithms, specific pieces of content might be placed in a feed multiple times. That doesn't necessarily mean people saw it, but it meant it was placed in the feed for them to potentially see it. Reach is then the total number of unique eyeballs. So if this helps you understand it, I typically just tell students, like, think of it total views and total unique viewers, with that asterisk being, remember, just because it was placed in the feed does not necessarily mean the content was actually seen by a user. So it's very possible for you to have some numbers like 150,000 impressions for a certain time period with only 20,000 reach. That means that that content was placed into somebody's feed a lot of times before they may have actually seen it, or even after they've seen it, they may see it again in their feed. So very important to understand the difference between impressions and reach. One of the other biggest terms you need to know is engagement. And I'm going to have a chapter that I wrote in the Slack channel for this week all about engagement and the different types of engagement on the different platforms. It's a very vague term and it means a lot of different things. So let's really quickly walk through some of the different ways that may count as engagement. Let's start on Facebook, for instance. We typically think of the like as the cheapest form of engagement. It requires the least amount of effort. It's just a single touch of the thumb. Then you have the specific reactions. And I ask students, why is this a more involved level of engagement? And the reason why is because you have to hold your thumb down for a second for the reactions to pop up. So that does show an act of engaging with the content more than just simply pushing a button. They're having to now actually think about which one of these they want. Comments take things to an even further level. They have to write out a comment. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean they had to thoughtfully write out a comment, right? But it means they had to put the time to go in and leave a comment. And then there are shares, which on Facebook and on most of the platforms, shares are still right now considered the king of all engagements. And the reason why is because a share, what that is saying is, not only do I want to see this content, I want all of my friends and family to see this content. So for most brands, for most newsrooms, a share is still that ultimate goal when it comes to it. But that is changing some. We'll see some other levels of engagement here in just a second that might take precedent over shares. Other types of engagements, clicks obviously count as engagement. If you have a click to call on mobile, that counts as engagement. For some businesses, especially restaurants or somewhere like that, a click to call might actually be the highest form of engagement they would want with their users. Subscriptions count. There's a reason why YouTubers are constantly begging people to subscribe to their channel. What that does is it beats the algorithm. It's telling the algorithm, hey, I don't care what signals you're sending. This person has subscribed to me, therefore I will show up in their feed every single time. And then any shopping, if you have any type of store on your social, whether it's Facebook, Instagram, Pinterest, if somebody buys something from your platform, that's a really high level of engagement. And again, for a lot of businesses, that might be the highest level of engagement. We tend to, for the sake of our analytics reports with clients, we tend to focus mostly on the big ones, the likes, the comments, the shares, depending on who our client is and what work we're doing in the class. These are still the easiest to count, and they're the easiest for the students to kind of wrap their head around. And quite frankly, for some lower level clients, these are really the only level of engagement they might have with their content. Again, with shares being the big one. All right, so let's take a look at some of the specific platforms and the types of analytics you can get from them. And this is a real quick walkthrough. We're going to have way more in-depth discussions of this during the in-person workshop. Here's a look at Facebook Insights, and you have to be an admin on a page in order to get this type of information. I'm going to skip straight ahead to the parts of insights that I think are the most valuable. And I really start with the post page. Here you can get information like what days of the week is your audience using Facebook. So you can see for this particular page, this is our School of Journalism and Mass Communication. We have a pretty steady audience across all 7 days of the week. So this comes into play with strategy with, when you decide what days you're going to be posting on. For some businesses like churches, bars, restaurants, things like that, you might focus more heavily on Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday. For other businesses, it might be a 7-day a week, or you might notice your audience isn't on Tuesdays and Wednesdays as much as it is on the rest of the week. So pay attention to that. The thing right underneath that is known as the whale. This is the time that your audience is typically online. So, this doesn't necessarily mean that this is the exact time you need to post, because the algorithm still decides when that content goes out to someone. But this does show you that if your audience is typically online from 9 to 7 p.m. with a peak usually around 8 o'clock, you might try some posts later in the afternoon and see if they get a better type of engagement. Here's just a straight up look at all the posts that have been made, and you can get a lot of information from this. You can see you get the actual post, the type of post, the reach, again, impressions versus reach, important to know. You'll notice Facebook uses reach. We're going to see Twitter uses impressions. Facebook doesn't have to worry about low numbers with its engagement. Twitter does have to worry about that. So that's how that comes into play with strategy. And then Facebook just has this generic engagements column, which I'm going to show you a better way to do that. You can also get some good data regarding your audience. You can see here our School of Journalism is about 65-35 female to male, and that actually lines up with our demo. You can see the age ranges, the cities they're from, the languages they speak, things like that. So it's important to take a look at your audience from that perspective. I mentioned in the introduction to this module that Facebook's testing a redesign, and one of my former students is part of the beta group of it, and she sent me a bunch of screen grabs. And here's one, and you can see this looks very Google Analytics-ish, if you've ever used Google Analytics. So this isn't, what Facebook's going with, but they are testing it right now, and she's noticed a couple different versions of it. Here's the whale. So they've done away with the whale, and they've gotten actually more detailed with times of day. And this, I actually much appreciate this than the whale, which is a pretty vague, generic sense. So we'll see where Facebook goes with this. But for now, you still have to be an admin on a page to be able to see the current level of insights, which could dramatically change here in the coming weeks or months. On Instagram, you have to be on mobile to see analytics, and you have to be a business page to see advanced analytics, but everyone can see a certain number of things. So we can all see the number of likes and comments on our posts. So that's one thing that anyone can see. And then on Instagram stories, we can see not only the total amount of viewers, we can see who viewed it, but we can also see that kind of follow through rate. So if your first one did really well, and then the second part of the story did half as much, and the third part of the story did a quarter as much, you've lost your audience there. So this is all valuable information, even if you're not a business page. But I'd really recommend anyone who's interested in analytics, just go change your account to a business account. It doesn't require anything other than you have to link it to a Facebook page. So you can go do that, and then you get advanced analytics from Instagram. So here's an example of a page I help run called Instagram Texas. I just want to show you what what insights look like on Instagram. So you can see here I'm viewing, it's pretty scaled down. It's nowhere near as in-depth as you get on Facebook. But this is a little drop down wheel there where you can select photos or videos, and then the time period, and then which metric you want to look at. So here's impressions, here's reach, and here's engagements, which counts as clicks, comments, direct shares, things like that. So you can gauge your analytics through that wheel and all the things that are available for it. And you also get a look at your audience. Again, nowhere near as in depth as Facebook gets, but you can get a look at, gender, when they're on, age range, locations, things like that. Twitter allows anyone to get insights. So even if you're not a business page, not a verified account, you can go into your analytics. So here's just a look at mine, and you get this kind of month by month snapshot of where you stand. So there's a basic dashboard of the previous 28 days. Your top tweet is in terms of impressions. Again, there's that impressions versus reach. The top mention was number of engagements, the time somebody mentioned your name in a tweet. Top follower is the person who followed you in the past month that has the most followers. And then top media tweet involves a photo or video as well. And then they give you these kind of snapshot summaries, and you can continue to go month by month to do that. Twitter also has the equivalent of that post page where you can click on tweets and see all of your tweets lined up and see how they did in terms of impressions, engagements, engagement rate, which is typically impressions divided or engagements divided by impressions, although Twitter has its own specific formula with that as well. A couple of issues with analytics. One is we talked about Instagram hiding likes. Facebook is considering doing that as well. What will that lead to? We don't quite know, but something to consider as these two or this, the same company that runs both of these platforms considers removing likes and the impact that might have on data. Facebook in the past couple of years has cut off the fire hose, so to say. They've shut down the API version of the API to its analytics with certain data that they were getting from credit reporting agencies. So, for instance, a marketing firm that I consult with has a lot of home service companies, meaning we wanted homeowners for our ads. Facebook now no longer allows us to just target homeowners. We have to take a guess as to who we're getting based on age and stuff like that. So it's made advertising a lot more difficult. But this was a direct response to Cambridge Analytica. So for instance, here's a quick look at a Facebook ad. We used to be able to scroll through here and check on these behaviors that Facebook had all of these options for us: homeowner, renter, demo in terms of salary, things like that. We no longer get that type of information. So our ads have to go to a much more generic audience when it comes to that. Twitter also recently made that decision. So at the end of January, they did away with their advanced analytics. And this was just for verified accounts. So for instance, I'm verified on Twitter. So I used to get insights like this with household income, education levels, what wireless carrier did they use, what device are they using. This has all gone away now. So Twitter has also gone the route of getting rid of these advanced analytics. Some are speculating they may come back at some point, but it's to be seen. So when it comes to creating analytics reports, I teach my students how to build them by hand in Canva. And that's a very important thing, I think, because it's a skill that they're going to need if they go to work at a small agency or a small mom and pop business. If they go work at a big company, they can probably afford some third-party platform to do it for them at the push of a button. But most of our students are not doing that, or at least not with their first job or their second job. So I walk them through how to do that with Canva. We'll be doing that with you as well in the in-person part of the workshop.